"Yea," exclaimed the miller's wife; and, mistaking the cause of Paslew's emotion, she added triumphantly to her daughter, "Ey towd te, wench, that Lort Abbut would be o' my way o' thinkin'. T' chilt has got witch's mark plain upon her. Look, Lort Abbut, look!" But Paslew heeded her not, but murmured to himself, "Ever in my path, go where I will, it is vain to struggle with my fate. I will go back and surrender myself to the Earl of Derby." "Nay, nay, yo shanna do that," replied Hal o' Nabs, who, with the miller, was close beside him. "Sit down o' that stoo by the fire, and take a cup o' wine to cheer you, and then we'll set out to Pendle Forest, where I s' find yo a safe hiding place. And t' onny reward ey never ask for t' service shan be that yo'n perform a marriage service for me and Dolly one o' these days." And he nudged the damsel's elbow, who turned away, covering with blushes. The abbot moved mechanically to the fire, and sat down, while the miller's wife, surrendering the child with a shrug of the shoulders and a grimace to her daughter, went in search of some viands and a flask of wine, which she set before Paslew. The miller then filled a drinking horn, and presented it to his guest, who was about to raise it to his lips, when a loud knocking was heard at the door below. The knocking continued with increased violence, and voices were heard calling upon the miller to open the door, or it would be broken down. On the first alarm, Abel had flown to a small window, whence he could reconnoitre those below, and he now returned with a face white with terror, to say that a party of arquebussiers, with the sheriff at their head, were without, and that some of the men were provided with torches. "They have discovered my evasion, and are come in search of me," observed the abbot, rising, but without betraying any anxiety. "Do not concern yourselves further for me, my good friends, but open the door and deliver me to them." "Nah, nah, that we winna," cried Hal o' Nabs. "Yo're no ta'en yet, Feyther Abbut, and ey know a way to baffle 'em. If yo'n let him down into t' river, Ebil, ey'll manage to get him off." "Weel thowt on, Nab," cried the miller. "Theawst na been my mon 7 year for nowt. Theaw knowst ways o' t' pleck." "Os weel os onny rotten about it," replied Hal o' Nabs. "Go down to t' grinding room, and ey'n follow 'ee a trice." And as Abel snatched up the light, and hastily descended the steps with Paslew, Hal whispered in Dorothy's ears, "Tak care now no one fonds that chilt, Dolly. If they break in, hide it safely, and when they're gone, take it to t' church, and place it near t' altar, where no ill can come to it or thee. Thy life may hong upon it." And as the poor girl, who, as well as her mother, was almost frightened out of her wits, promised compliance, he hurried down the steps after the others, muttering, as the clamour without was redoubled, "Eh, roar on till yo hoarse. Yo winna get in yet awhile, ey promise ye." Meanwhile, the abbot had been led to the chief room of the mill, where all the corn formerly consumed within the monastery had been prepared, and which the size of the chamber itself, together with the vastness of the stones used in the operation of grinding, and connected with the huge water wheel outside, proved to be by no means inconsiderable. Strong shafts of timber supported the flooring above, and were crossed by other boards placed horizontally, from which various implements in use at the mill depended, giving the chamber, imperfectly lighted as it now was by the lamp borne by Abel, a strange and almost mysterious appearance. 3 or 4 of the miller's men, armed with pikes, had followed their master, and, though much alarmed, they vowed to die rather than to give up the abbot. By this time Hal o' Nabs had joined the group, and proceeding towards a raised part of the chamber, where the grinding stones were set, he knelt down, and, laying hold of a small ring, raised up a trap door. The fresh air which blew up through the aperture, combined with the rushing sound of water, showed that the Calder flowed immediately beneath, and, having made some slight preparation, Hal let himself down into this stream. At this moment a loud crash was heard, and one of the miller's men cried out that the arquebussiers had burst open the door. "Be on thee then, lads, and let him down," cried Hal o' Nabs, who had some difficulty in maintaining his footing on the rough stony bottom of the swift stream. Passively yielding, the abbot suffered the miller and one of the stoutest of his men to assist him through the trap door, while a third held down the lamp, and showed Hal o' Nabs up to his middle in the darkling current, and stretching out his arms to receive the burden. The light fell upon the huge black circle of the water wheel, now stopped, and upon the dripping arches supporting the mill. In another moment the abbot plunged into the water. The trapdoor was replaced and bolted underneath by Hal, who, while guiding his companion along, and bidding him catch hold of the woodwork of the wheel, heard a heavy trampling of many feet on the boards above, showing that the pursuers had obtained admittance. Encumbered by his heavy vestments, the abbot could with difficulty contend against the strong current, and he momently expected to be swept away; but he had a stout and active assistant by his side, who soon placed him under shelter of the wheel. The trampling overhead continued for a few minutes, after which all was quiet, and Hal judged that, finding their search within ineffectual, the enemy would speedily come forth. Nor was he deceived. Shouts were soon heard at the door of the mill, and the glare of torches was cast on the stream. Then it was that Hal dragged his companion into a deep hole, formed by some decay in the masonry behind the wheel, where the water rose nearly to their chins, and where they were completely concealed. Scarcely were they thus ensconced, than 2 or 3 armed men, holding torches aloft, were seen wading under the archway; but after looking carefully around, and even approaching close to the water wheel, these persons could detect nothing, and withdrew, muttering curses of rage and disappointment. By and by the lights almost wholly disappeared, and the shouts becoming fainter and more distant, it was evident that the men had gone lower down the river. Upon this, Hal thought that they might venture to quit their retreat, and accordingly, grasping the abbot's arm, he proceeded to wade up the stream. Benumbed with cold, and half dead with terror, Paslew needed all his companion's support, for he could do little to help himself; added to which, they occasionally encountered some large stone, or stepped into a deep hole, so that it required Hal's utmost exertion and strength to force a way on. At last they were out of the arch, and though both banks seemed unguarded, yet, for fear of surprise, Hal deemed it prudent still to keep to the river. Their course was completely sheltered from observation by the mist that enveloped them, and after proceeding in this way for some distance, Hal stopped to listen, and while debating with himself whether he should now quit the river, he fancied he beheld a black object swimming towards him. Taking it for an otter, with which voracious animal the Calder, a stream swarming with trout, abounded, and knowing the creature would not meddle with them unless first attacked, he paid little attention to it; but he was soon made sensible of his error. His arm was suddenly seized by a large black hound, whose sharp fangs met in his flesh. Unable to repress a cry of pain, Hal strove to disengage himself from his assistant, and finding it impossible, flung himself into the water in the hope of drowning him. But as the hound still maintained his hold, he searched for his knife to slay him, but he could not find it, and in his distress applied to Paslew. "Have you any weapon about you, lord abbot," he cried, "with which I can free myself from this accursed hound?" "Alas! no, my son," replied Paslew, "and I fear no weapon will prevail against it, for I recognise in the animal the hound of the wizard Demdike." "I thought the deil were in it," rejoined Hal; "but leave me to find it out, and do you get bunk, and make best of your way to Wiswall. I'll join you as soon as I can crush this varmint's head again a stone. Ah!" he added, joyfully, "I'll part Twiddle. Go, go! I'll soon be after you." Feeling he should sink if he remained where he was, and wholly unable to offer any effectual assistance to his companion, the abbot turned to the left, where a large oak overhung the stream, and he was climbing the bank, aided by the roots of the tree, when a man suddenly came from behind it, seized his hand, and dragged him up forcibly. At the same moment his captor placed a bugle to his lips, and winding a few notes, he was instantly answered by shouts, and soon afterwards half a dozen armed men ran up, bearing torches. Not a word passed between the fugitive and his captor, but when the men came up, and the torchlight fell upon the features of the latter, the abbot's worst fears were realised. It was Demdike. "False to your king, false to your oath, false to all men," cried the wizard. "You seek to escape in vain." "I merit all your reproaches," replied the abbot; "but it may be some satisfaction